Evolutionary Underground episode 53 is coming your way. Today we have a really good episode. Today we're going to talk about best first cycle ideas for a newbie by Geneza Pharma. So we got BeMe joining us. He's on the forum, BeMe. He's back again. I believe this is his third time on the podcast, and he's going to bring a lot of good information and knowledge to this show. We're going to all talk about our first steroid experiences, what we learned from that, our mistakes, pros, cons, regrets. We're going to talk about keeping it simple. We're going to talk about should you start low. We're going to talk about making adjustments to your cycle. We're going to talk about Geneza Pharma newbie stack ideas. First, to remind everybody, we are on Apple, we are on Spotify. Smash the like button, subscribe, tell your friends and family, leave comments, all that stuff. That helps the algorithms pick us up and helps us grow our channel. So first, thank you, BeMe, for joining us again.
Yeah, thanks
Fresh,
for having me.
thank you. And let's get right into it. So why don't you start us off, BeMe? Talk about your first cycle. What did you do? How old were you? Do you have regrets? Pros and cons? We want to hear it.
Okay, well, it's pretty easy for me to remember because I'm still really new to all this and it wasn't all that long ago. I was actually 40 and my first cycle was back in April. I guess before that, you could say I was sort of on cycle because I had started TRT back when I was 39, turning 40. But I didn't actually delve into a first cycle until I was 40 years old, and this was back in April. So the first thing I did was really just as much research as possible. I was looking around online, doing a lot of reading, and that's actually how I ended up coming to the Evo forum. And once I got on the forum, I was doing a lot more reading through logs, reading through mega threads, and just trying to understand what the best first steps would be because I was totally brand new to all of this. And started a log. That was the key to everything, really, was just starting a log on Evo and having the members jump in and give me a lot of guidance and sort of hold my hand along the way. And that sort of gave me the confidence to really build a cycle that I wanted to do based off information the members gave me and little tips and tricks that I picked up along the way. So my first cycle started pretty simple, and it's kind of something I would recommend to everybody is always just start low, start simple, pick something that's not going to have a lot of side effects, something you don't have to worry about too much. And I think in everybody's mind, that would be Primo. Primo's probably has the safest risk profile of all. You get good, solid gains. You know, you're not going to blow up, but at the same time, the gains you make, you'll probably do a good job keeping. So it's very good that way. And it's pretty easy to control, you
So what
know.
was your dosing on the testosterone? Did you just keep your TRT dose? And what was that? And what was your primobolan dosage?
So my TRT dose at the time coming in was at 180 milligrams, and based on some advice, I just bumped it up to 200 milligrams for the cycle. And for the Primobolan, I brought it in at 150 milligrams a week just to start, just to see how my body would sort of take it. And I knew going in that I was going to run a longer cycle. I figured low and long would be better than high and short, again, limiting the risks. So I started the Primo at 150 and I slowly titrated up from there. I think by about week 3, I was at a 1-to-1 ratio of 200 tests, 200 Primo, and slowly titrated up the testosterone with the Primo as I went along to eventually where a point where I got to a maximum of 300 milligrams of test and 300 milligrams of Primo. Now, on that cycle, I also added a couple other compounds in as well. Another newbie choice, like best choice, is probably Anavar. That is another pretty safe compound in the grand scheme of things. And again, it's limited risk profile and pretty decent gains. And the strength gains you get in the gym are incredible. As a first-time user, I think everybody is looking for that like super anabolic feeling, where your androgens are just way up and you just feel all of a sudden like a different sort of man.
Yeah.
And Anabar will definitely give you that feeling.
So
There's
how much Anavar did you use and when did you add it?
So Anavar, I started at the same time as the Primo, and I ran it at 20 milligrams a week, and I only took it sublingually, and I did that to avoid the hepatotoxicity, try and
So you
avoid as much liver damage.
injected 20 milligrams a week or a day?
No, no, Anavar. I was doing it orally, sublingually, so I would
Oh,
grind it up and put it under my tongue,
so a day
and
though. You said a week. It was a day, right? 20 milligrams a day?
sorry, 20 milligrams a day. Sorry,
Okay.
yeah, I misspoke. Yeah, and I would only take it on training days.
Just on training.
Uh,
Okay.
yeah. So
I will jump in here, BeMe, because the idea that you can take something sublingually and avoid the hepatotoxicity is not correct. There's still going to be some pass through because what
Oh,
system is it getting
there
into your
will,
body by?
yeah, there will definitely be some, but it's definitely
Yes,
it's less. It's proven that it's
maybe.
less.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's actually something you pick up from your drug user days too.
Yeah, I was gonna
You learn
say,
that
I was gonna
sublingually.
mention that. If you listen to his previous episode on the interview, BeMe was
Yes,
the
yes,
biggest drug
yes.
dealer in North America at one point. He was
Yeah, I mean, a
what's that
lot of
guy's
sorry,
name from South
just on
America?
that particular topic, guys. As I'm sure BeMe will have appreciated back in the day, it's a difference between getting into your system to get high as quick as you can versus the idea of not having that first pass through the liver thing. And I actually, it's nothing to do with BeMe. I actually talked about this particular idea. Someone else came up with it more recently, 6, 7, 8 weeks ago on the forum. And I said, sorry, what do you mean by that? Well, then this happened. So I said, I understand the logic, but unfortunately, the body doesn't work like that. I think BeMe is probably correct. I wouldn't know 100% one way or the other to say whether there's less toxicity. I'm saying I think he's correct. But again, guys, this is the sort of stuff that you do research for. You do want to know. There will still be some impacts, whether it's more or less we could debate on another show. But I'd probably want to go away and research that to be factual in terms of my response. Back to you, Bean.
Yeah, it's the reason it is because it's entering through the mucal membranes under your tongue and getting into your bloodstream directly versus entering through your digestive tract and being absorbed through the liver. So while of course you're gonna ingest some of it, the idea is to get the bulk of it through the mucal membranes right into your bloodstream, and that increases the, I guess you could say, the hit you get from it, while at the
Yeah.
same time avoiding that hepatotoxicity.
Even if you
So
had zero ingestion, no down the throat, no digestion, there's still going to be some filtration, so to speak, of the system by your body. So
mhm.
there will still be some kind of impacts. But I suspect, like I said, I
Yeah.
think you're probably right. I just want to be 100% sure if I knew to say, yes, BeMe's correct
Yeah.
or
All right.
no, BeMe's wrong. I wouldn't want to say one way or
So
the
you
other.
guys can try out both ways and see which works for you. So what else did you run? And tell us what your results were and what regrets did you have?
Well, so the Anavar, like I ran that through the entire cycle. And then I eventually titrated up to 30 milligrams a week. Because in the beginning I was having issues with crazy pumps, which does happen to some people. And I took taurine and electrolytes to help with that. And then once I got to about 8 weeks on cycle, I added in some NPP for the back half of the cycle. Now, just because I'm already 40 years old and I have been lifting for a long time, I was willing to try and experiment with a few different compounds in one cycle because it didn't worry me as much. Like a younger person, I'd probably recommend not doing that. But
Yeah.
for me, it worked out really well. And the NPP came in at 200 milligrams a week. So at this point, I was already taking at that point, it was at 250 milligrams a week of test, 250 milligrams a week of Primo, and I added in 200 milligrams a week of NPP and titrated up from there after a couple weeks to the point where it was 300, 300, 300, and finished off my cycle that way. I also threw in 25 milligrams a day, actually on your advice, Steve, of Proviron. And that was obviously to prevent the decadic, the dreaded decadic. And thankfully it worked. And yeah, the cycle went
Yeah.
great. To be
So
honest
you
with
don't
you,
have any regrets at all? Nothing you would
my
have done
biggest
different?
regret of all was when you actually, I did a consult with you before throwing in the NPP, and you recommended I just start at 300 milligrams a week.
Hmm.
But I kind of like chickened out a little bit, obviously trying to be safe and whatnot.
Okay.
And I started low at 200. So my big regret was not listening to you, and
Maybe,
I should have
yeah.
just started.
But
I should have just started at the 300.
Rome isn't built overnight. So in the future,
Yeah,
you don't have to. I'd rather you come lower than go too much and regret it. And how much did you end up
yeah.
gaining on this?
On cycle, I put on like at peak, I added about 16, 17 pounds. I started at 177,
Wow.
and my highest
Yeah.
weight measured was 193, 194.
In how many
And
weeks?
I've helped, that was over 16 weeks.
Okay.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to say I'm like 12 weeks off cycle now, 10, 12 weeks off cycle, and I'm still 190 pounds.
All right, excellent.
Wow.
So let me tell you guys about my first cycle, and then Mobster, you can say yours. So my first cycle, I was surfing the internet, similar to what BeMe was doing. This is well before Evolutionary even existed, and I came across a thread. Someone actually told me, one of my gym buddies actually told me about steroids, and he said, you should use DECA. You should use DECA, and I was like, okay. So I started researching DECA, and I came across a thread online, a transformation thread where a guy used DECA. He was like me. He was a skinnier guy, but I wasn't skinny. I'd put on muscle at that time, but he was, he definitely had room to bulk. I'll put it that way. So I really was impressed with his transformation in the thread that he posted. So I was like, fuck it, I'm going to use DECA. So I started researching, and people, some of these other forums were like, no, you shouldn't use DECA as a first cycle. You should stick to just, testosterone. I was like, no, I want to use testosterone, DECA, and Debo. I want to use the ultimate bulking stack. So I'm going to fucking do it. So I went ahead and did it. I did 30 milligrams a day of D-Bol. I did 500 milligrams a day of Sustanon because my source at the time, back in
A
those
day,
days,
a day.
A
yeah,
week.
30 milligrams
Yeah,
a day of
yeah.
D-Bol.
Oh,
Fucking
okay.
hell,
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Did
Yeah.
I say, wait, my bad. And then
You said 500 a day. Yeah.
yeah.
So yeah, Sustanon was 500 milligrams a week. So I had to actually back then I had to actually import steroids from a source
Yeah.
overseas. This was a source that my gym buddy recommended. So I took that chance to do it, and they didn't have testosterone cypionate. So they literally didn't have any in stock. So I had to order their Sustanon. So I said, fuck it, let me just order Sustanon. Like, who cares, right? And then I got DECA, and I did DECA 400 milligrams a week. I did the exact same cycle that's parroted on the internet for bulking.
Yeah.
It was a
Yeah.
12-week cycle, and I used the D-Bol just as a kickstart. So I did two of those cycles over the course of a year. I did them for 12 weeks, then cycled off for like 15 or 20 weeks, did a PCT, and then I went back on and did another one for 12 weeks. So over the course of a year, in those two cycles, I put on 20 pounds, but my body
Wow.
fat also went from 7% body fat up to 17% body fat. So my
Oh,
regret was bulking too much and too fast. I was so obsessed with just
Yes.
getting big, getting it, getting it. I was eating everything I could. I was eating two breakfasts, working out in between. I was obsessed with just training and eating and fucking. That was all the thing I did over the course of that year. And my work suffered in the process. But I ended up putting on 20 pounds and completely transformed my physique, and my strength went like crazy. So my biggest regret doing that was running multiple stuff, but also bulking too much and too fast, because once you bulk up too much and too fast, usually it's a lot harder to lose that body fat back, especially from a steroid cycle, because your body becomes so insulin resistant. It goes from insulin sensitive to insulin resistant. So in the future, I'd recommend anybody, and I was 28 years old when I did that. So that would be my regret. So Mobster, why don't you tell us yours?
Yeah, I've talked about this on other shows, and I did two things which were kind of clever in that I brought from the two main gurus in this country at that time, Mick Hart and Paul Borison, both their sort of starting uh, steroid PED books. And my second clever thing was to essentially realize that where they differed was opinion, but where they agreed was most likely to be fact. And so I literally, almost at the beginning of both books, was the simple, straightforward D-bowl cycle that I've addressed on previous shows. And I think off the top of my head, we're looking at the first two cycles were identical. The first cycle would have been 8 weeks at 30 milligrams a day of D-bowl. And as I said on other shows, Steve, that would be 350 milligrams a week, 210 milligrams a week at that particular point. And I averaged on cycle gaining 10 pounds and off cycle keeping approximately 6 pounds with both of those cycles. And I think part of the experiment for me was also this whole quote unquote roid rage thing. And as I described this in another show, that the nature of my job at the time could be forward facing and occasionally aggressive, assertive, confrontational. And so I was thinking, if I'm on steroids, let's do a low dose, because if it does make me a grumpy git, roid ragey, whatever, I want to be able to sort of keep the dose low and not go out there and start tearing people's heads off their shoulders. Fortunately, that's not the case. And with Debo, as we've said on other shows, there's almost an element of feeling quite good with the pumps, etc. The instantaneous size they're putting on, regardless of water rate or muscle, is fantastic as fuck if that's what you want, and that's exactly what I wanted. And the only issue, I won't say it's a regret because it was all that was available to me at that time, is we didn't do what we would now call a proper PCT. So literally, for example, AIs weren't really a thing. Some people knew what the fuck they was, but the rest of us didn't, and they weren't covered in these books and the online research, which I was just about doing at the time. So my AI, my PCT was essentially Novadex, and that was it. But I did also have that slightly clever thing, which was covered on other shows, of eating for the new size and training for the new size. I was age 37. So like BeMe, I actually kind of left it late. And I tell you, actually, in that particular regards, I'm glad I did. And I think BeMe would be arguably glad he did, because it meant that we
Absolutely.
trained for a long time and we built up a stable, I think Steve's even said this, foundation. And I won't, because the lack, and that doesn't apply to BeMe so much. I think it does somewhat to Steve, and it certainly did for me, because 37 was still 20 something years ago, 23, 24 years ago. I've said this on other shows, Steve, in terms of information and accessibility to everything, including ancillaries and AIs, the new users have never had it so good. Part of the reason why we're doing this show, guys, as you two will appreciate, is it's almost too much information. And the worst information, I think, comes from social media influencers, and I use that word very loosely. Certain twins with the word trend in front is going to be an obvious example of young people being given the wrong advice. So listen, guys, when you're listening to this show, 100%, we want to put out information that's based on actual experience, ours included, including the mistakes we've made, and actual information that's out there from more solid information sources than quote unquote social media influencers telling you to do fucking stupid amounts of shit just to get more likes on fucking Instagram, for example. So yeah, look, age-wise, I think Steve, BeMe and I were good, because we were essentially as near to middle age as it's possible to be before we started using PEDs. And as BeMe's just indicated, we got great results. Even Steve got great results. I would argue that perhaps Steve was probably the right side of the age, which we're going to discuss as we get into that. So yeah, what next, guys?
So let's talk about keeping things simple and should you start low. So I'll let BeMe start that one off, and then Mobster, you jump in.
I mean, starting low is the way to go, always.
Yes.
It's like anything else in life, like the first time you drive a car, you're not going to go and jump in and start doing 200 mile an hour. You're going to drive through a little neighborhood street and take it easy and feel your way through it. It's no different. You don't want.
Some do, and the obvious example that you just given is the wankers that do crash. The wankers that do
Exactly.
smash the car up and get hurt. So this is another reason. Let me also jump in for this one. And I wrote this down as part of the pre-show research. It's literally, if you put too much in, you cannot take it out, guys. So BeMe titerating up, as he said earlier on, absolutely makes sense to me. And why use more than you need to get the best fucking results? So talk a little bit about that, because you had great results doing exactly that, BeMe.
Yeah, like my whole experience on first cycle was really one of learning. Like I was trying to really understand what my body was doing, how it was accepting these different compounds, what doses would affect me in certain ways, and that's why I sort of spaced everything out as much as
Yep.
possible and added in things slowly, just so I could see how my body was adjusting through the different levels.
Yes.
Because I do
Yes.
want to know what the maximum, what the minimum dose is for the maximum results, basically.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
this isn't a game. You know, we're talking about our long-term health here, and I've always come at everything in fitness through a long-term health perspective. Now,
Yes.
granted, steroids are, probably more about vanity than long-term health, and more about output in the gym. Really, for me, it was just not being able to train as much as I want to, because I'm really addicted to training. So we really need to figure out what the safest way to go about this is, because nobody's the whole "I'm here to live for a good time, not a long time" thing is stupid. That's
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
young people say when they're really young, and then when you get
Yes.
to about my age, 40 years old, you start getting
Yeah.
a little more perspective in life, and you look back and you're like, man, I was an idiot living that way and thinking that way, you know.
I'll expand on that. On some shows that we done a few years ago, Steve, you might recall me saying this. That I'd been on the forums, Muscle Talk, for example, the late 90s, might be mid 90s, late 90s, and I would see people literally saying what BeMe just said. Live fast, die young, I don't give a fuck, motherfucker, do what I fucking like, blah, 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 blah. And they were all 21, 22, 23 years of age, maybe 24, 25. And I'd been on those forums long enough to see the same fucking people that had said exactly those words, BeMe, come back and be full of regrets. And it would usually be recreational drugs, not necessarily steroids, but nearly always out of their group, say 10 buddies, one had done an overdose and died. When it came to steroids, as obviously we're going to touch upon, the idea of the age thing, which I believe Mitchell Hooper actually talked about this. He said the brain doesn't physically, and he means physically, not mentally, is not physically capable of mature decision making. The experience that BeMe referred to is the other aspect. And one of the reasons why we talk about these things in this particular way, and I don't want to bang the drum too hard, guys, a bit naggy, is fertility. And we have literally got 2 or 3 open logs on our forums right now where people that have used PEDs in the past, and these are mature people, they're not 24, 25, they're in the mid to late 30s, who are having fertility issues, but want to have more kids. And in a couple of examples, they have stayed on steroids for years. Other one, it was just more of an abuse of, rather than the length of time on steroids. And all 3 individuals, men, are trying to increase their fertility, their sperm count, back to a level where they can get their love of their life, their wives, but certainly the love of their life, not the bird that they were shagging when they were 23, the love of their life, pregnant, so that the desperately needed baby that they really, really want as a couple can come along. And that decision making is not made when you're 18 or 19 or 23 or 24. It's made when you look back and think, what the fuck was I thinking? And again, the fact that you can go fight a war, become an MP, represent your country in a Senate or whatever else at certain ages, but not have us give you quote unquote permission to use an excessive amount of steroids that's going to fuck with your facility is kind of skewed. But unfortunately, it's done with perspective, with age. And listen, we only say these things to help you because we want you to be fertile. We want you to have kids. We want you not to make those mistakes. So look, let's talk about a little bit here without jumping too far ahead. The number one age, and it can vary, but according to every single time this kind of topic comes up, pretty much all of us agree that 25, 26, 27 seems to be the right age.
Yeah, and I'll let BeMe
talk a little bit about too much, too young, etc.
Yeah, let me explain the way it works. So, as Mobster said, your brain and your body doesn't finish developing till well into your 20s. Okay, your HPTA. A lot of people have the mistake out there of thinking that my testosterone levels peak at 17 or 18 years old, and then it's all downhill from there. That's not how it works. A lot of you think that because, oh my God, I'm horny at 17, 18 years old.
It feels like it, but it isn't like it.
Yes. I'm chasing women. It's like in high school, unless you're the captain of a football team, you're probably chasing women and not getting anywhere, or chasing guys, you're not getting anywhere. Okay, whatever. And at the end of the day, that's how it is. And you think, oh, I'm this horny means my testosterone levels are peaking, whatever. That's not the way it works. It's because your hormones are changing. Your hormones are changing at that age.
Yes.
So that's what's giving you that libido. And at the end of the day, when you get later in life, you end up with a mortgage and kids and bills and you have all these stresses daily in your life, and your libido will start dropping for a lot of other reasons besides just your hormones. But that's, so that's the way it is. So yes, I will admit at 17, 18, that may be the horniest time of your life, but that doesn't mean that your testosterone levels peaked and your testosterone levels are going to fall off a cliff at 20 years old. So what happens is if you start introducing hormones as a teenager or even in your early 20s, you are fucking with your HPTA development. You're fucking with your reproductive system. So what ends up happening is when you fuck with it, it won't fully mature properly. So if you start using, my old co-host on the podcast, Coach Trevor, used steroids at 18 because he listened to the wrong person. And by the time he was 20, 21, he had no sperm. He had the testosterone levels of an 80-year-old man or lower. And he could not produce his own testosterone, could not produce his own sperm anymore because he fucked with his HPTA at a young age. Once you fuck with it, it may possibly never ever come back. So here's my advice. I would wait till you're at least 21 to even consider steroids. But if you do insist on using them in your early 20s, keep the cycles short, keep them very mild, and make sure you spend most of the year off and make sure you're doing blood work to confirm that your numbers are bouncing back. Because if your numbers don't bounce back and you hop on another cycle right away, you're just causing more damage in the process. So you
The
got to think of
least
it
you
that
can
way.
do, Steve, if you absolutely fucking must, guys, and especially if you have a chance of a professional, athletic, or otherwise career, small piece of advice, it's going to cost you some money. Get your fucking sperm frozen. The local IFBB pro, and I've mentioned him before, James Llewellyn, has had to pay for IVF with him and his wife, Melissa. This is painful, it's uncomfortable, and ultimately it's expensive. But one of the things that he did, and he was never a big PED user, Steve, I've never seen any of his cycles that he's been very open about, much over 2.5 grams total. And he had his sperm frozen. It was one of the few things he invested in before he made the money on crypto. So look, do we want to go down that road? No. We've talked about fertility as an issue in society on another show where we talked about people in education and professional careers leaving it later, that being an issue, chemicals in society and stresses. But guys, think of it in these terms again. You're literally shutting off the tap because you are deciding to add extra testosterone to your system before you need to. And you will arguably not have maximized your potential for natural gains, your ability to learn properly how to train, to learn properly how to eat, and learn properly to combine those things. And I just this morning, in fact, saw a great video by Josh Baker, the Gym Reaper, talking about guys owning their shit and really getting 100% into training hard, eating hard, etc., 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 so that they can get to where they want to go. I understand it. We all understand it. What we were like when we were younger, how ambitious we were, and the idea that I could become Arnold Schwarzenegger or Steve, a fucking basketball player, or BeMe, some sort of fucking 400-pound lumberjack marching through the Canadian woods or whatever else, is a great appeal when you're 18. Yeah, or a hockey player. Absolutely a hockey player. And especially getting the girls after the game or whatever the fuck else, or pulling crumpet at school or whatever. I absolutely get it. But the reality is you need to listen to what we're telling you. And again, once you're ready, the rest of the show, and especially what we talked about at the beginning of the show, with that research and the low doses, BeMe did a great example, I think, BeMe, where you said 2 or 3 weeks before this happened, 2 or 3 weeks before that happened. And that was just long enough for you to get that sense of whether something was working. And you even turned around and said something which I liked as well, which was the seeing how I felt when I was doing a certain particular thing. I think moving on a little bit, but I will also put this down. I wrote something down in my show notes, which was short esters versus long esters, which we can get into. The KISS, I wrote this down in my show notes as well. Keep it simple, stupid. No need, and I have seen this given as an example, for people that will go online, and again, we've done this on other shows, where we've looked at what the professionals are doing, or what we think the professionals are doing. 5.5 grams a week, diuretics, cleanse this, DMP that, yada, yada, yada. Tons and tons of growth hormone and insulin. No, and fucking no. Keep it simple. Take a low dose of Debo, a low dose of Deca, a low dose of Sustanon, and start from there. do not do everything all at once, because then how the fuck
Yeah.
do you know what works? Talk a little bit
So
about
yeah.
that, Steve,
So
because we're
BeMe,
going to talk about
yeah,
simple approaches
I
as
want to
well.
bring BeMe in there because he started his first cycle. Was there a temptation for you, and was there advice that you saw online from people on other forums that were telling you to throw the kitchen sink as your first cycle? And
Oh,
what kept you from
absolutely.
falling for that temptation?
Absolutely. Like even on Evo, there was one or two guys when I posted up my first question about steroids when I first joined and starting a cycle. There was one or two guys that jumped in with some pretty serious cycle advice. You know, it was the prototypical 500 mgs a test. You got to add in like 300-400 deca, maybe throw in some debo. Kind of basically
Grab a
like
trend. We know that would
yeah,
do.
from you know who, but
We know who
maybe
that is.
kind of like your first cycle, Steve. Basically, I think that sort of old school mentality was really there, and not even really considering like someone's goals or anything like that. Even just
Yes.
just throwing out standard cookie cutter old school cycles, and everybody's going to be different in their goals. Everybody's body is very much different in how you
Yeah.
respond to
So
compounds.
what
Just because
made you not listen to that and go more mild?
honestly, I think it really has to do with age.
Life experience?
Life experience, age,
Yeah.
and just perspective. As a 40-year-old man, I'm able to think through like 20-year-old BeMe would have been all in.
Yeah.
20-year-old BeMe would have been
You would have
probably
been like,
running two
fuck it,
grams
you
of gear.
know,
Yeah, I would
day
have
Take
by
been
take
running two
take
day.
grams
take
of gear.
the gym guy's advice. Not listen to your head as you do when you're 40 years of age, when you're 37
Exactly.
years of age. Listen, let me
Yeah.
give you a silly little side story, guys. And I've mentioned this guy on one other show, I think, where the gym owner calls me over and asked me to ask this particular question because he knew that the answer was going to be whatever. And this particular person wouldn't come to the gym unless he shot 300 milligrams of testosterone, meaning he wouldn't leave the house to go to the gym in his car to get there unless he'd done at least a mill and a half of testosterone. And it was literally the psychological idea that he needed to do this just to go to the gym to make it worthwhile. And imagine if you're a young user, as we're discussing today, and you're standing by the counter bullshitting with the boys, and the theories, and we've all seen this, not just on the forums, but especially in life, with some of the stuff, and especially on other forums, where you see some of these conversations. I think, Steve, you actually said this, and I'm sure, BeMe, you'll realize it's true as well, where the expert turned out to be 15 years of age and you'd read something online, posted it, and that was sometimes the information that we had available to us as quote unquote factual examples of studies. And then you realize that the expert had his bollocks hadn't dropped. They hadn't hit puberty yet. This is the person you're listening to. Or the guy at the gym who's a water buffalo is telling you, oh, I do a mill and a half before I leave the fucking house. And you're like, the fuck am I listening to this bullshit for? What is it? I mean, how many times have we seen young would-be users saying, I've done my research? No, motherfucker, you Googled once and you
Yeah,
looked at something once.
that's
40
classic.
years of age, 37 years of age allows us to question the logic of what we're reading. Why the fuck would I want to look like you? Why would I do what you're telling me to do? Why would I take that information as gold? I need to compare your information with 6 or 7 other different sources. I need to make sure that everybody agrees. There is literally, we can do this now, as you know, guys. We can literally go onto university pages, educational pages, and literally go into and look at research papers where they've actually studied these things in a proper way with
Yeah.
small doses, other doses,
I
medical
think
uses, and we can actually see what's going on. Yeah.
I think the bottom line is, and I'll let BB finish out this topic, but I think the bottom line is you think, hey, if I go aggressive as my, first cycle, as a newbie cycle, it's going to get me further. But in reality, it's actually not. It's actually going to put you backwards. And as Mobster said, the guy who can only train with steroids, it's because you did not put in enough time training without steroids to really like to train without steroids. So that when you've only been training for 6 months and you hop on steroids, then now you can only train while you're on
Yes.
steroids because it is nicer to train while you're on steroids. You get more pumps, you get more strength, you see your muscles growing so much rapidly. So it definitely is a different experience. But that's the problem is that you can't go through life like that. It's like buying hookers, that blonde bimbo hooker that you bought when you were 22 years old for the first time. This is the first time you get a hooker, right? But in real life, if you're an average looking dude, you're not going to be able to land a woman like that unless you're a billionaire or a millionaire, right?
And
So it's kind of like,
you don't want to marry your hooker. You don't want a hooker as a wife.
yeah.
You'll
So
choose
at the
her.
end of the day, it's not a long term plan to just say, you
No,
know what, I can only train while I'm on steroids. So that's one of the top reasons why, as a newbie, you really should put in the time and train first, and then you can get the Geneza Pharma cycle that you love once you put
I
in the
like
time.
BeMe's example earlier on, and I think you said the same thing. The idea, the car analogy, which we've used on a couple of other shows. Imagine your driving lessons always going to be like on a 1 liter, 1000 cc, 90 horsepower if you're lucky car. There's a fucking reason for that, because if they let you into a Ferrari for your driving lessons just to get your license, you'd be screaming up the road at 200 miles an hour, smashing into a tree, on fire, screaming, oh my God, because you'd be out of control. So you deliberately start with a small, safe, secure car with seatbelts and safety system, and it can't do more than 50 or 60, and it's got dual controls for the person showing you how to drive. Because otherwise you'd crash and fucking burn on day one. And the idea that you can do that with steroids and it's okay is silly. It makes sense to be safe and secure and whatever else, and to learn as you go.
So let's
The
let
number
Beanie
one
finish out
thing,
this
the
topic.
number one bit of advice is don't be in a fucking rush, guys.
Yeah.
Absolutely. This
So
is a
let Beanie
journey.
finish out this topic, touch a couple minutes, and then let's get into some Geneza Pharma cycles that we would do as a newbie.
Yeah, I would say the biggest piece of advice I can give is side effects are a real thing. You know, they exist and they can hurt you badly. We see it all the time, guys on the forum going through horrible side effects. And the way you avoid that is by titrating up. Now, if you just throw the kitchen sink at it, like we said, and you start at high dose with a whole bunch of different compounds, you have no way of knowing which compound is giving you the side effects, what dose is giving you the side effects. You have no clue. So you just went into this cycle, maybe you blew up for a bit and then just got covered in acne, your blood pressure went through the roof, and you get out of breath walking up the set of stairs, and you have no idea what did that to you. So you're no smarter now than when you went into the cycle. So what are you going to do for your next cycle? How are you going to improve? The only way to know this is by slowly titrating up, introducing compounds individually or separately, and you feel your way through it and just learn where to go from there. And each cycle is going to get progressively better and safer.
All right, so let's get some Geneza Pharma cycles. So I'll start us off. And look, Geneza Pharma, they have everything you could possibly want. And one of the things that, all three of us, Mobster started out with D-Bowl, but one of the things that BeMe and I did was use testosterone on our first cycle. So Geneza Pharma, they have different options. So what I recommend with Geneza Pharma is their Test E or Test Sip. Now, those are the top two selling steroid options, testosterone options, and steroid options overall for a reason, because it's simple. So it's a serious cycle. Don't think, oh, I'm going to use testosterone as a newbie and it's just going to be easy and I don't have to really do anything to I don't have to use an AI or any of this stuff. It's still serious. Any of these steroids that we're talking about are serious business. So don't think that, oh, I can just use testosterone and not even care. So anywhere from 200 to 500 milligrams a week, no reason to go above that as a newbie. Trust me, 500 milligrams is plenty. And then I highly recommend, if you do go on the higher end, you get Aromacin or Arimidex, and Geneza Pharma does have both. So you could do a 10-week cycle or a 12-week cycle, come off, make sure you do your PCT. And again, Geneza Pharma has your ancillaries, including your PCT products. Now, a couple other options. They have GP Geneza Pharma Primo, as BeMe ran. They have the GP Equipoise. Now, Equipoise is a great option. The problem is it's got a long ester. So if you're going to be on it, keep that in mind. You want to stretch out your PCT a little bit, maybe 8-week PCT instead of just the 4 or 5-week PCT. And then you want to make sure you take a lot of time off in between cycles. Masteron is also another injectable you can do. It'll harden you up. And then when it comes to orals, I like the GP Anavar or GP Turinabol as a first cycle. Lower side effects, doesn't come with surprises. You can keep the dosage just 20 to 40 milligrams a day. So, BeMe, what would you run as a newbie? What would you recommend that newbies run?
The first cycle I would recommend to anyone is just a testosterone only cycle. And you don't even have to run high doses either. Just for example, when I started my TRT protocol, I started at 120 milligrams and titrated up from there to 150 after about 8 weeks, and titrated up again to about 180 after about 6 weeks. And in about 4 or 5 months' time, just running those doses, I was able to gain about 11, 12 pounds in that time, just
Mm.
from testosterone, just low dose testosterone. Especially if you're older and your body's low on testosterone. I mean, you saw the pictures I had coming into the forum, and I was pretty lean and pretty hard
Yeah.
at 177 pounds, and I was only running testosterone. So I think it's a good first step for most people, just to figure that out, because test is going to be the base of almost every cycle you use going forward. So really learning how your body adjusts to testosterone, and like you said, how your estrogen is affected. Do I need to run an AI? What dose do I need to run an AI at? Things like that. How are my blood markers going to look on certain doses? That's really critical to know before you start introducing other compounds. So I'd say like a newbie should just be running testosterone only for their first cycle, and really just stay on top of everything, figure it all out, because that's going to be the key to your success moving forward.
Mobster,
I,
go
I,
ahead.
yeah, I've got some suggestions rather than some cycles, but it's going to be reusing Geneza Pharma products, right? So, number one is have an AI on hand. And we've seen this a few times where guys will start a cycle, realize there's a problem, and then have to buy the AI. And it takes a week, 5 days, 2 weeks, whatever to get there. So always have the AI on hand until you know whether or not your body actually needs it. And if you're a newbie, you don't know. So that's number one. Number two, regardless of what Steve suggests or BeMe suggests, there is a great argument to be made for using shorter esters for certain products, especially when you've not tried something before. And again, as a newbie, everything is things that you've never used before. So why would, for example, we talk about the T-Bowl, the Anival, or the D-Bowl that we've all three suggested? That's because they're in your system relatively quickly and out of your system relatively quickly. The longer esters of testosterone, and certainly the more aggressive steroids, vis-a-vis tren, etc., the longer esters are in your system, the longer it takes to come out your system. And if you are having issues with side effects. So, for example, guys, I've said looking at GP's Arimidex and Aromacin for sure to being on hand for your cycle. If you do decide to go down the testosterone route or other injectable steroids, use the shorter esters. And something else that we haven't really mentioned here, guys, and it is something that we kind of talk about on the forums and in the ebooks, and we have mentioned on other shows, and that's arguably getting your bloods tested pre-cycle, during your cycle, and post-cycle. It's even the way that BeMe did it, and that's no different to me and Steve in that particular regards, seeing what was working for us. Probably what we wasn't doing at that time, guys, was actually having a proper picture via blood tests of what we're doing. And it's again a piece of advice for newbies that sometimes we can get caught up on the whole spending money on a cycle, and then we can kind of cheap out on getting the blood test. So yeah, look, guys, I did make an additional note, and it's actually related, I think, to something we were talking about earlier on. I do like the idea now, and this would be a piece of advice for new users and newbies. I do like the idea of running Proviron on every cycle. It's something I never used to think about, and Geneza absolutely has you covered in that regards. And the reason why that we give this advice, and especially again to newbies, and again with what BeMe just said about using lower dosages and getting great results, and that is the idea that Proviron from me boost the effects of what you're using without being especially expensive or requiring a higher dosage. 25 milligrams a day of Geneza Proviron is great, and it actually kind of boosts the effect that a low dose of testosterone. So I think those three things, again, all with Geneza products, because they have you covered in that regards, is good advice for any kind of cycle that you might be doing using Geneza products, and again for newbies especially, Steve.
Yeah, and I just want to say nothing wrong with just doing an oral. In BeMe's case, he's already on
Of course.
TRT. So if you're on TRT, you're going to want to stay on testosterone, obviously. But if it's your first time and you just, especially if you're a younger guy, a 4 or 5 week oral only cycle is going to be in and out of your system quick. So you'll
Yep.
be able to recover quicker. You'll have less damage to your HPTA. If you run a long ester steroid injectable cycle, like 12 weeks of testosterone sip, equipoise, or primobolan. These are longer esters. They're going to be in your system not just the 12 weeks. Keep in mind, they're going to be on your in your system for an additional 6, 7, 8 weeks, possibly.
Yes. Yes.
So that's a long time to be shut down before your body can start repairing again. So doing a short oral cycle like just D-Bol or just Anavar or just T-Bol, it's not a bad idea just for 5 weeks. After a week and a half, once you come off, it's going to be out of your system and then you can PCT. So if you're in your early 20s, I don't recommend using steroids until you're at least in your late 20s. But if you do want to use it at 21, 22, or even 25, 26, it might not be a bad idea just to do a short oral with Geneza Pharma. And the nice thing about Geneza Pharma is they have excellent oral options as
Yeah.
we've gone through. BeMe, any final thoughts before we cut you loose and finish out the podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. Like oral only cycle, I think is where a lot of people end up going for their first cycles. You don't have to deal with any needles if you're
Yeah.
new to all that sort of thing. Like you said, the fast in, fast out is really ideal. And you get that feeling like I mentioned before where you go super physiological right away.
Yeah.
Like there's not, oh, I'm waiting for 6 weeks, 8 weeks for blood saturation, and then finally it kicks in. I think a lot of first time users are really looking for that kick in the ass to just start really giving it in the gym. And orals are going to be the way to go for that sort of thing. Can't go wrong. And just to follow up on what Mobster was saying about the Proviron, and it was a tip you gave me actually, Steve, is keep some on hand for when you come off cycle. Because even though you're not injecting or taking the orals anymore, that stuff is still in your blood. There is a half-life to
Yes.
consider, and
Yes.
Proviron's going to help ease the way down while you're on that taper off. So make sure you have extra on hand. Don't stop the Proviron just because you stopped your
Yeah.
cycle. Consider your half-life and use the Proviron accordingly.
And a lot of people too can use Proviron in PCT, even though it's considered an anabolic steroid. It's more of a drug, and I've seen the evidence from blood work where guys actually ran Proviron in PCT and still rebounded, were able to rebound. So Proviron doesn't suppress you like other anabolic steroids. It's probably the only one. It's the only anabolic steroid, at least of the main anabolic steroids, that actually won't shut you down and won't suppress you when you use it. But the downside is if you just use Proviron for 5 weeks, it ain't gonna really do anything except maybe harden up your
Yeah.
muscles a bit. It's not gonna do shit for you. Maybe it'll
No.
boost your libido a little bit, but it's not gonna help you grow muscle. So it's not something you can just run by itself. You do need to run it as part of a stack. But as BeMe said, you could extend it more into PCT. And as BeMe said, if you are running NPP, which is nandrolone phenylpropionate, you want to run always Proviron with a nandrolone to offset the DHT versus DHN. You want to have that balance. And also to touch on something Mobster said earlier, blood work. A lot of people come on the forum, they want to
Yeah.
know, will I need an AI? Is this a good enough AI to run a cycle? Nobody knows. Nobody knows that. Your body is different. Everybody's body
And
is
it
different.
changes, Steve. It
So
changes. Even guys that, yeah,
blood work is important on cycle. As a newbie, you may want to get blood work on cycle just to see what happens. Because a lot
yes,
of people run steroids, they get the blood work done, and they're like, "Oh my God, my LH and FSH are at 0. What is going on here?" If you're on steroids, your LH and FSH will go to 0. That means your pituitary glands are not functioning, which is normal on a cycle. So it's good to
experienced users,
know
Steve,
what you're looking
experienced
at.
users can have a good idea how their body responds and whether or not they need an AI. But even then, and I've said this before, someone that's in their 20s, 30s, or even 40s will respond, especially if they're lean, will respond one way. But as they get older and or their body changes, for example, they get fatter, they suddenly start to find that they do need an AI, and they didn't know that they needed an AI until they started to see signs of gyno because they wasn't getting blood tests throughout the cycle. So again, how we respond changes. And here's an example again: newbie advice: leaner is better than fatter. And that's just straightforward. You will get better results if you're leaner. You can see better results if you're leaner. Absolutely. Don't wait until you're on
So
cycle.
touch on that a little bit as well, BeMe,
Yeah.
because you were a lean guy when you first used steroids.
Yes.
I always tell people
Yes.
this: look, what's the point of running steroids and building muscle if it's covered up by fat? Like, you're not going to be able to see your abs if you're 18 or 19% body fat. Why not cut first and then you can use the steroids? So talk a little bit about that, BeMe, before we cut you loose.
Yeah, like you said, I think a good rule of thumb, first of all, is every newbie should be booking blood work for 6 to 8 weeks in on cycle. That should be an absolute must for a first time cycle. No ifs, ands, or buts. Just do it. And regarding staying lean or getting lean before going on cycle, we say this to new people all the time. You know, they'll show up on the forum, you know, maybe they're at like 20% body fat. They've just started training a year ago. You know, they list their macros and they don't really know them, or they don't really have much of a diet plan. Like, these are all things you need to figure out before you start a cycle. You need to have a good diet in place. You need to have a good training background, because these are the things you need to have dialed down before you start the cycle,
Yes.
because it's going to
Yes.
make your cycle that much better. The whole reason of
Yes.
taking steroids is to maximize gains. You're trying to improve your recovery so you can maximize your gains. Now, how do you maximize your gains if you're not doing everything properly? You know, if you're half-assing your diet or you're half-assing your training, you're not maximizing anything. So these are the important factors. Steroids are just one piece of the puzzle. You know, it's
Yes.
not like you can sit on your ass on a couch, inject some testosterone, and you're going to suddenly just blow up and just get all muscular.
If
It
only.
doesn't work that way. You know, it doesn't work that way at all. You know, you need to put in the work, you know, and you need to have everything dialed in first. And in relation to body fat, it's a known fact that higher body fat is going to lead to a higher instance of side effects, you know,
Yep.
and that all comes back to safety. So it's like Mobster said, if you're higher body fat, the steroids aren't going to work as well. You're not going to be maximizing the gains, and at the same time you're going to be, you know, experiencing higher side effects, and nobody wants that. So really, it's important, especially as a newbie, dial in the training and the diet first. Those are the two pillars that you need to have dialed in before introducing anabolics.
Yes.
All right, BeMe,
Absolutely.
we really appreciate you coming on, buddy. Mobster and I are going to finish out the show. But BeMe, you can go check him out on the forum, BeMe. You can check out myself and Mobster as well. We all have logs going. So appreciate it, BeMe. Take care, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Can I just say one thing before I take off?
Yes, sir.
The Evo bosses, I'm not sure who they are, but I want to say thank you and a big shout out to the Evo bosses. Recently, they covered the expense of some hats we got from Harley Guy. And it
Yep.
was really a really kind gesture, and I had no idea who to thank. You know, I did say thank you in the mod chat, but I'm not sure if that even gets to them. So just while I have this opportunity, I just want to say a big thanks to the Evo bosses. That was like such a cool thing to do, and I really appreciate
Yeah.
it.
That
Yeah.
is awesome. All right, buddy. We'll talk to you
All right,
soon.
thanks guys as
All right.
always.
All right.
Bye.
All right, Mobster and I, listen, we're going to talk about Geneza Pharma. And Mobster and I were big, big fans of Geneza Pharma. We've both been using them
Yeah.
for years and years. They're one of my favorite brands for sure. Now, why would that be? And we've talked a lot about steroids on this podcast. We've talked about a lot of Geneza Pharma options, injectables, orals, ancillaries. They have you covered on your first cycle. If you're a newbie, it's very
Yeah.
important. The biggest mistake you can do as a newbie when it comes to buying steroids is overpay for steroids, is
Mm.
buy steroids that are fake or underdosed, okay? And also that ordering steroids and not being sure if you're going to get it. It is a
Yeah.
nightmare situation. And look, we're blessed that Geneza Pharma provides you good quality products. They're 99% pure products. They have fast shipping. And whether you order international or domestic, they're going to get it to you as fast as possible. You don't have to worry. They have great reps that are always there to take care of you. And the
Yes.
prices are fantastic. It's affordable. Okay. It's affordable. Way more affordable today than it was back in
Oh
the day when I
man.
first used my steroid cycle. So they are wonderful. So,
You,
Mobster, yeah, go ahead.
I mean, imagine like you're a newbie all over again, Steve, and we've both had fake products. We've both had products that 100% had no effective dose in them whatsoever, no product in them whatsoever. We definitely paid, and I know you've even said this before, over the odds for certain things. And we've told the stories on these shows about guys literally having zero choice, free products in the trunk of a man's car at the gym. And that still fucking happens, which is kind of crazy. Guys, when you've got a company like the Geneza to buy from, we've never had it so good. You really haven't. I'm going to sound like a politician, Steve. You have literally got every single product you could possibly need at great price. I mean, I'm just looking right now, Steve, as we're doing this show, looking at what's available to the guys, and this a fraction, less than half. Some of these products are what they were 10 years ago in terms of the cost, and that's because the volume's gone up. Companies like Geneza are around; they've been around a long time, providing you with solid products that you know is going to work. And as a newbie, that is absolutely what you want. Oh Christ, I'm that old. I think my first debowl, Steve, was probably from Pakistan or Karachi. I've seen the little ampules of Pakistan or Iranian in that testosterone enanthate, and now I know that I can get it domestic or international in fucking days at a fraction, even the price that I paid, a fraction of the price I paid. Never mind 15 or 20 years ago for some guys. So you want a company like Geneza on board. You want a great source. You want a solid product. You want a clean, sterile product. You want the product to be dosed. And again, guys, especially for you younger newbies, you don't want your hard-earned, small at that time disposable income, because you're out clubbing, you're doing all the other shit we do when we're young, and even the older guys, and you want to make sure your money's going in the right place for a good, solid fucking products. It's the reasons why we rate Geneza, Steve. It's the reasons why we want like companies to be Geneza as part of our source, as part of our background and availability. And it's just having every single thing. Again, Steve, let me very quickly look as I'm finishing this show. I mentioned that they've got all the AIs, they've got all the ancillaries. I'm looking at clomidine, Steve, clenbuterol, Deca, 2 different kinds of Deca areas, Steve, several different kinds of testosterone, different dosages. They've got you covered. Even my favorite, my own newbie cycle, Dynabol, they've got the 10 milligram and the 50 milligram optional. They've got the same again, Steve. 2 different kinds of master on here, a 200 and a 100 milligram per milliliter. This enables you to have the flexibility. It's not you having to fucking buy just what your dealer has. Literally got every single thing at different dosages. They know what users are going to use. They've put the products together in that particular way. They've made it easy for you. And when you come onto the forums and absolutely check out the sources that's selling Geneza products to you. What else am I looking at here, Steve? Novadex, I mentioned earlier on. That's an absolute bargain right now. NPP. I've seen some of the UK prices for products from UK sources, Steve, and it's $30 or $40 per product more for me to be able to buy UK domestic versus US domestic. Your US domestic users are absolutely going to make a killing here, guys, because the products are on point. And I'm talking about multiple pages. I'm literally just on page 1, Steve. The Winstrol, as I said earlier on, 10 milligram and 50 milligram options of the orals, and obviously 50 milligram injectable. I'm looking at this again. The Proviron that we mentioned already, I can't believe how cheap that is. That would be UK equivalent is about 17 quid right now as we do this show late 2025. Guys, again, just from the newbie thing, as we finish this show off, come onto the forums and check out the information we've got. We've got ebooks and advice. We can give you direct advice. We can ask all the questions that we need to ask about you, where you're starting from, and it's going to be how old you are sometimes as well, to find out what you need, to let you know what to do, to make sure that you get the best gains you've ever had in the safest way possible with the best advice that we can give you, and often as not specific to your own particular requirements. I might point you in the direction of an ebook. I might get you to do a little bit of extra research for yourself. But again, this is about you doing the right thing the first time out, so you make as few mistakes as possible and get the absolute best results you possibly can. And that's the reasons why we have guests on like BeMe. We talk to Stevesmi and herself about our own experience so that you don't have to make the mistakes that we might have made. You don't have to make mistakes. You don't have to lose money. You don't have to buy the wrong product. You get every single thing right the first fucking time. And even better, Steve, you get to keep those gains and make them as permanent as possible. And fingers crossed again, if you follow our advice, we try as much as we possibly can to keep that facility where it needs to be so that you don't make those crazy decisions when you're younger. And our older, wiser heads give you great information for when you get older yourselves. And then one more thing, guys, you then pass on that great information to those people coming up behind you, just like we're doing today. Thank you so much as always. Please note, we are not doctors and your opinions are ours. It is our view based on our experience and views on the topic. Our podcast are for informational purposes and entertainment only. The freedom of speech and the First Amendment applies.